Good morning. I hope everybody's doing well today. I'd like to read a short story I wrote, having been raised by a single mom um, who was a deputy sheriff eventually and 16 years and a chief magistrate judge, I believe, for 8 or 12. She was an incredible person. So I've written a few short stories called based on My Money's on Mama and some things she got into. Here's one called My Money's on Mama, the Raccoon. Mama opened the screen door and yelled, "You boys come help me get the car started. I'm going to be late for work." She had bought a car known as a Vauxhall, which few people in our area own, and for good reason. It was far from reliable and extremely small. Yet it had a back seat, so Mama declared it both affordable and big enough. She bought her week's worth of gas on payday, and the car only moved when absolutely necessary. Grandmother took us to church. The same went with food. She bought a week's worth, and that was that. If we gobbled it down, we went hungry later in the week. She supported 3 boys while making just over $100 a week, with some help from her parents, who lived next door. Oh well, back to the car. My 2 brothers and I often had to push the car fast enough for Mama to pop the clutch and start the engine, bringing it to life for at least one more trip to work. This job was much easier if the car was on a slight incline. However, we lived near the Okefenokee Swamp in South Georgia, and it was mostly flat land. So Mama usually used second gear to make it a little easier on us and give her a fighting chance at starting it. The little car roared to life as Mama headed for work, and we readied ourselves for school. She was a single mom now, and to work or not was no longer her decision. It was a sheer necessity. She had worked at Crowder's Poultry in the nearby town of Douglas, Georgia, for 3 years now as an assistant to the plant manager. To her, it was not a particularly fulfilling job, but it helped pay the bills. Many people in the area were employed there, which really helped the local economy. Mama pulled into the plant parking lot just as it began to flood, quickly forming puddles she'd have to navigate on her way to the entrance. She backed the little car onto the only slight hill available in case it didn't cooperate after work. Most people saved that spot for her after having to push her more than once themselves. She navigated the puddles as best she could and entered the building. Her phone was already ringing off the hook as she sat down at her desk. It seemed everyone needed something at once as she began answering the phone calls. Her boss came to her desk and asked her to call the funeral home to see if a friend of his was there. She picked up the phone and placed the call. She asked if Mr. Carver was there, and the person on the phone replied he was. Now, as I've said, Mama was very busy and misunderstood the purpose of the call. She asked if she might speak with him. The man on the phone informed her that he couldn't come to the phone and that his visitation was that evening. Imagine Mama's surprise. Mama didn't miss a beat and replied, "Then I guess I'm a little late. Thank you." She had to come back for anything and refused to bend in any situation. Resiliency was one of her many strong suits. She finally finished her long and frustrating workday after what seemed like an eternity. It also seemed she'd had to solve everyone's problems. Now, she had a problem of her own, trying to start the Vauxhall for her trip back home. She patted the gas pedal frantically as she turned the key. She knew she could only try this for so long without the risk of flooding the motor. Luckily, a few of her co-workers hadn't left yet and helped her shove the car to life. Mama was finally on her way home. Meanwhile, my brothers and I were scrambling to finish our chores. Mama had drawn a diagram of the house and hung it on the refrigerator. It was divided into 3 sections, with one of our names in each of these sections. This indicated the responsible party for each part of the house. On this day, we had finished our inside chores, but we were also supposed to mow the lawn. As Mama stopped at the mailbox, we knew we had spent way too much time arguing over the yard and not nearly enough time mowing it. We each saw the look of disapproval on her face as she parked the car and glanced our way. There was now only about an hour of daylight left to mow before dark set in. Mama knew we couldn't possibly finish, thus defaulting on our obligations. And she was big on fulfilling obligations. Her whole life now seemed to her to be dedicated to fulfilling obligations. I remember one Saturday morning I went in the house where Mama was working on the laundry. She noticed me and asked why I was in the house. She told me it wasn't time to eat or go to bed, so I should get back outside. I wanted to watch television, but she wouldn't allow it. She told me to go back outside and find something to do. I told her that I was bored. It was the one and only time I ever said that around her in my life. She stopped what she was doing and left the room. She soon returned with a digging trowel and a 5-gallon bucket, told me to follow her. She led me to the big backyard and gestured all around with her hand. I want you to dig up all the weeds in this yard. After that, rake the pine straw up around the trunks of all the trees. And then, if you're still bored, come bother me again. I never told her that I was bored again. She had a very direct way of getting a point across. Well, on this particular day, Mama parked the car under the usual small tree and started to get out. I remember one of us cranked the lawnmower and began mowing. I don't remember which one of us did it, but it was done to save us all from her consternation. I knew we were in for some serious trouble already. However, fate intervened in a most unusual way and gave us a reprieve. When Mama opened the car door and got out is when it happened. A large coon leapt from the small tree onto Mama's shoulders. We were now not the focus of her attention. The coon was. The conflict was now between him and her. I don't think that raccoon considered what 3 growing boys can do to a single mom's nerves, but he would soon learn. Mama, as I've said, had just had a very rough day and was ready for bear, or raccoon. It was on, and my money was on Mama. She reached up and flung that coon hard to the ground, which momentarily both shocked and stunned him. He now knew he was in for a fight as she grabbed a homemade gallberry broom she kept outside for sweeping the porch and such. She laid into whomping that sucker repeatedly with all the anger that she'd acquired in her life, and she was angry about it a lot. This was not how her life was supposed to be. She was angry with a husband who left her with 3 young boys to raise alone. She was angry that she'd had to return to her parents for help. She was just plain angry with life and the hand it had dealt her. And now she unleashed her anger on that coon. He didn't stand a chance. We stopped the lawnmower to watch the show. We were too young to help her much, so we just stayed out of the way. Mama could handle anything. We knew that. The gallberry broom was proven to be too flimsy for the job, and she fully intended to do a thorough job. There was a stout, store-bought broom up on the porch, and Mama started backing in that direction to retrieve it, holding off that coon best she could with what she had in the meanwhile. The coon, thinking she was making a retreat, began lunging at her again, growling and showing its teeth. That's about when Mama reached the broom and removed a few of those teeth that he was so fond of showing. He kept coming anyway. At this point she yelled, "Stand back, boys, I think he has rabies." She didn't have to tell us but once. She went right back to swinging that broom like a baseball bat, which made the coon back up a little, but not much. He was acting strange, like he was plumb out of his head. But as I've said, Mama had experienced a particularly bad day, as she demonstrated misplaced aggression right then and there. He was out of his head, but she was more than up for the task. Once again, my money was on Mama. She now had him right back where she wanted him, on his hind leg, and he knew he had to try to get away. He ran past her and right under the Vauxhall. It was a small car, as I'd said, and no match for the reach of her broom handle. She banged the broom handle first on one wheel and then another until he came out and ran right up the small sapling where our story began and his ended. Mama had planted that tree only 5 years ago, so it had not grown very tall yet. She could easily reach the top with her broom handle. When the sheriff's department came out to collect the varmint, they were amazed at Mama's tenacity and bravado, which later led to a job offer from them, but that's another story. We weren't amazed, however. We had seen it demonstrated many times, and we already knew that a rabid coon is no match for this angry one. The test came back positive for rabies, as Mama had suspected. We already knew he was either sick or just plain madder than Mama that day. And as always, my money was on Mama.